"Please don't lift my skirt," she murmured, folding in, her trembling fingers clutching the hem as though it were the last thread holding her together. The lone rancher did, however, his weathered hands brushing away the dust from the rough fabric, revealing not skin, but the edge of a torn, mud-stained letter pressed against her thigh. It was brittle with age, the ink faded to a ghostly brown, and as it caught the flicker of the kerosene lamp, his eyes narrowed. He had seen this handwriting before. Once, long ago, on a winter morning when the snow had smothered the land and blood had soaked into the frost. He remembered the name scrawled in that script, and the debts tied to it. "You've been carrying this?" His voice was gravel, heavy with suspicion. She averted her gaze, her breaths quick, almost jagged. "It's all I have left of him." "Of who?" The silence stretched, taut and dangerous, until the wind outside moaned through the cracks in the ranch house walls. She looked up at him, and for the first time he saw the sheen of steel in her eyes beneath the fear. "The man you killed." The words didn't land like an accusation. They fell like a match in dry brush. His jaw tightened, his shadow thrown across her face by the swaying lamplight. He didn't deny it, not yet. The air between them thickened, carrying the smell of dust, leather, and a memory neither could escape. "That man," he said slowly, "was not the one you think." She almost laughed, short, bitter, humorless. "Then explain why his blood was on your hands when you came back from the canyon." His gaze shifted toward the darkened window, as though the night outside might help him gather words. "There are things you don't know, things you shouldn't know." "Then why keep me here?" she snapped, her voice cracking the stillness. "If you're so innocent, why lock the door and bar the windows?" He stepped closer, the boards creaking under his boots. The scent of tobacco and rain clung to him, and his presence seemed to fill the small space until there was nowhere for her to retreat. "Because, girl," he said softly, but with a blade of warning under the words, "if they find you before I can get you out, you won't live to see another sunrise." Her defiance faltered just enough for fear to slip through. "Who's coming?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached into his coat, pulling out a revolver, so worn its grip was almost smooth. He set it on the table between them, the metal glinting. "Men who don't ask questions. Men who don't care that you're not him." Her brow furrowed. "Not him." His eyes met hers again, and in them she saw the weight of someone who had carried secrets like boulders for too many years. "That letter isn't about your father. It's about the man who took his name." The wind rattled the shutters, and in the distance, faint but growing, came the muffled rhythm of hooves. "If you want, I can continue this seamlessly into the next tense, escalating scene. I can carry the suspense forward without breaking flow. Would you like me to keep going?" The sound was slow at first, a steady pulse in the night, like the heartbeat of something dangerous drawing near. Her head turned toward the window, but all she saw was blackness pressed against the glass. The rancher's jaw flexed once before he reached for the lamp, lowering the flame until the room sank into a shadowed hush. "Stay away from the window," he murmured, his voice now an order rather than advice. Her instinct was to argue, but the tension in his posture froze her tongue. His shoulders, broad and solid, leaned slightly forward like a man listening to the ground itself. The hoofbeats quickened. She felt her own heartbeat match their rhythm, a drum in her chest she couldn't control. He took the revolver from the table and checked its cylinder, moving with the kind of efficiency that came only from habit. 6 bullets. She caught the faintest click as he spun it, then the heavy snap as it locked into place. "You're going to tell me what this is about," she whispered, though the fear in her throat made it come out softer than she'd meant. He didn't look at her when he answered. "You'll hear soon enough. But when the time comes, you run, not out the back, not toward the canyon. You head for the river. Follow it south until you hit the rail line. You don't stop for anything." "And if I don't?" she challenged, though her voice trembled. His eyes found hers again, cold and steady. "Then you'll die here, same as them." Before she could ask who them meant, the hoofbeats stopped. The night became impossibly quiet, the kind of silence that presses against the skin. She realized she'd been holding her breath. Then, just outside, the crunch of boots on dirt. 3 shadows broke against the thin sliver of moonlight seeping through the warped boards of the wall. One was tall and narrow, another thick and heavy, the last limping slightly, dragging a foot. They moved without speaking, their outlines shifting like predators, circling a fire they couldn't quite see. The rancher lifted a finger to his lips, then motioned for her to get down. She crouched behind the table, her hands gripping the edge so tightly her knuckles ached. A knock, sharp, deliberate, rattled the wood of the door. "Evening, Case," came a voice, smooth as oil and twice as slick. Heard you might have something belongs to us. The rancher didn't answer. The voice continued, lazy but with an undercurrent that made her stomach twist. A girl with something in her skirt that don't belong there. She stiffened, her fingers tightening around the fabric of her dress. Case, the name they'd given him, shifted his stance, his hand resting easy on the revolver at his side. You boys got bad information, he called back, calm as though they were talking about the weather. A low chuckle answered him. We'll just see for ourselves. The door shuddered under a sudden kick. The girl gasped, but Case didn't move. Instead, he waited for the second blow. And when it came, he stepped to the side, drew, and fired in one fluid motion. The crack of the shot split the night, and the heavy shadow outside dropped with a muffled grunt. The other two didn't hesitate. One crashed through the window, the glass exploding inward, while the limping man rammed his shoulder against the weakened door. She screamed as splinters flew, ducking lower, feeling the air thicken with the smell of gunpowder. Case was faster than she could follow. His second shot caught the man in the window square in the chest, sending him sprawling backward into the dirt. The third man burst inside, a knife flashing in his hand, and the two collided with a force that rattled the walls. She scrambled back, her hands searching for anything, a weapon, a rock, something sharp, but all she found was the fallen lamp. The flame inside danced wildly, threatening to tip. She hesitated only a second before hurling it toward the fight. It smashed against the floor near the man's boots, fire licking greedily at the spilled kerosene. He swore, stumbling, giving Case the opening he needed. A single, brutal punch sent the man crashing into the burning patch, and in seconds the flames began to crawl up his coat. Case didn't watch him burn. He grabbed the girl's arm, yanking her toward the back of the room. Move. The heat was already building, smoke curling along the low ceiling. She coughed, half running, half dragged as he kicked open a side door she hadn't even noticed before. Cold night air slammed into her, and she sucked it in like water after a long drought. They didn't stop running until the ranch was a dim orange glow behind them, the fire eating away the evidence of what had just happened. Her legs screamed, her lungs burned, but he didn't slow. Finally, when the sound of pursuit was gone and only the distant crackle of fire remained, he let go of her arm. She staggered to a stop, clutching her ribs. Who were they? She gasped. Men who knew the real man behind that letter, he said, his breath ragged but controlled. And men who'd kill anyone who could prove he wasn't who he claimed to be. She stared at him, her mind turning over the pieces like stones in a riverbed. So you didn't kill my father? Case's face was unreadable in the moonlight. I killed the man who killed him. The man who took his name and used it to hide from worse men than those. The truth landed in her chest like a stone dropped into still water, sending ripples through every memory she'd clung to. Then why save me? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. His gaze lingered on her, and in it she thought she saw a shadow of something almost human, regret maybe, or something heavier. Because your father saved me once, a long time ago. This is the only way I could repay it. Somewhere in the darkness, an owl called, its voice low and mournful. The rancher turned toward the sound of the river, the path glinting faintly in the moonlight. We keep moving, he said, and though his words were steady, there was something in the way he glanced over his shoulder that told her the danger wasn't over. The letter, still tucked against her thigh, felt heavier than ever. The river was a silver ribbon under the moon, whispering against the rocks as if it carried secrets only the night could keep. They moved along its edge in silence, the girl's shoes slipping on the damp earth, her dress snagging on low branches. The letter pressed against her thigh seemed to burn through the fabric, each step making its weight grow until it felt like it might tear her apart from the inside. Case walked ahead, his revolver still in his hand, his head turning just slightly every few minutes, scanning the shadows. The faint glow of the burning ranch still flickered far behind them, like the last breath of a dying star. She realized, with a cold twist in her gut, that the flames had not only swallowed the men who came for her, but also every trace of the life Case had built. Whatever he had been before, it was gone now. Finally, when the land opened into a flat stretch where the river widened, he stopped. His voice was low when he spoke. We've got an hour, maybe less. They'll regroup, and when they do, they'll come harder. She was breathing hard, her hair sticking to her damp face. Then tell me, she said, her words edged with desperation. Tell me the whole truth before they find us. I've spent my life thinking I knew who I was. If I'm going to die tonight, I want to know the truth first. Case's shoulders stiffened, as if the request was a weight. He turned to face her fully, the moonlight painting his face in silver and shadow. "Your father," he began, "wasn't the man the townsfolk whispered about. He wasn't a drunk or a coward or a thief. He was the opposite, too brave for his own good, too willing to stand between the innocent and the wolves that roam men's hearts." Her breath caught at the word wolves. "He found me once," Case went on, "half dead in a canyon after a job gone wrong. I was a younger man then, reckless, thinking I could outgun anyone. But I was wrong. He pulled me out, carried me through 2 days of storm and hunger, and never once asked for payment or thanks. Just said that a man ought to help another when he can." She saw it in the way his voice softened. This wasn't a story he'd told often, maybe not at all. "But there was another man," Case said, and now his voice hardened. "Looked enough like him to fool anyone who didn't know better. That man killed your father in the dark, took his papers, his name, and the trust that came with them. Then he used it to buy himself breathing room from the people hunting him. He thought no one would ever know." Her hands curled into fists. "But you knew." "I knew," Case said. "And I tracked him for years. When I found him, I made sure he couldn't hurt anyone again. But killing him didn't end it. It just shifted the target to anyone who still carried your father's shadow. And that's you." The words sank into her slowly, each one a blade carving away the version of her life she'd carried. The letter, she realized, wasn't just a scrap of her father's past, it was proof. Proof that the imposter had existed. Proof someone could use to tear apart the lies that had shielded dangerous men. "Then why not burn it?" she asked. "Why not end all of this right there?" Case's eyes didn't waver. "Because truth matters, even if it costs. Your father believed that, and now, so do I." The river murmured beside them, and for a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Then, from somewhere in the trees behind, came the faint, unmistakable crack of a branch under a boot. Case's gaze snapped over her shoulder. "They're closer than I thought." The urgency in his tone propelled her forward without thinking. They broke into a run, following the curve of the river until it spilled into a narrow gorge. The water was deeper here, rushing hard enough to swallow the sound of their steps. "This way," Case barked, leading her down a jagged path to a flat rock jutting over the water. She hesitated. "We'll be trapped." He shook his head. "We'll disappear." Before she could protest, he ripped the letter from where it had been tucked, pressing it into her palm. "Listen to me. There's a freight train that stops south of here at first light. Find the man named Brannon. Show him this. He'll know what to do." Her eyes searched his face, reading something there she didn't want to understand. "You're not coming with me." Case's silence was answer enough. "You'll die if you stay," she said, her voice breaking. "Maybe," he admitted. "But if I go with you, we both will. They need a trail to follow, and I'm going to give them one. They'll chase me long enough for you to get away." The sound of voices drifted down the river now, closer, angrier. She grabbed his arm. "Why? Why do this for me?" He met her gaze, and in the moonlight, his eyes were the color of worn steel. "Because I owe a man my life, and he's not here to collect. But his daughter is." Before she could speak again, he stepped back toward the trail, his revolver raised, his figure already melting into the darkness. The last thing she saw was the slight turn of his head, the faintest hint of a smile that wasn't really a smile at all, more like a promise. Then he was gone. The girl clutched the letter to her chest and scrambled down to the water's edge. The cold bit into her legs as she waded in, the current tugging at her skirts, pulling her south. She kept her eyes ahead, refusing to look back. Somewhere above the roar of the river, gunshots cracked like distant lightning. She didn't know whose they were. She didn't want to know. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. It was impossible to measure time in the dark, with only the river and the pounding of her own heart. When the first pale light touched the horizon, she saw the rail line. A hulking shape crouched on it like a beast at rest, a freight train, steam curling lazily from its stack. She stumbled toward it, her shoes heavy with water, her body aching. A man with a weathered hat and sharp eyes stood by the last car, scanning the line. "Brannon," she gasped. He looked her over once, then nodded toward the letter in her hand. "You've come a long way to find me." "It's from my father," she said, her voice trembling. "Or about him." Case said. His expression changed at the name. "Get on," he said quickly, his tone leaving no room for refusal. She climbed aboard, the metal cold under her fingers. Brannon took the letter, his eyes flicking over it with the speed of someone who already knew what it said. When he looked back at her, there was something in his face, a recognition, a grief. "You'll be safe now," he said, though his voice didn't sound certain. As the train shuddered to life, she pressed her forehead to the cool window. The river snaked away behind them, the trees closing in around its silver path. She thought she saw a flicker of movement in the distance, maybe a figure standing on the bank, watching, but it was gone before she could be sure. She never saw Case again. But in the months that followed, the letter did what it was meant to do. The truth it carried spread like wildfire, toppling men who had hidden behind false names and stolen faces. Whispers of a lone rancher with a gun and a debt to repay traveled from town to town, growing into a legend no one could quite pin down. And sometimes, when the wind was right and the night was quiet, she thought she could hear the low murmur of a river and the echo of a voice saying, "Truth matters, even if it costs." It was a promise she intended to keep, for him, and for the man who had died to give her the chance.